It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Inside the Red Arrows, the former RAF members who say there is a toxic culture at the world-famous squadron.
It just feels like they're marking their own homework. They want us quiet and they think it will go away. And it's not going to happen because none of us are happy with how it's been dealt with.
Also tonight, drivers stranded in the Highlands and thousands of homes without power as Storm Gerrit hits the UK. The Israeli military takes Sky News into what it says is the largest Hamas tunnel as Israel's ground offensive targets camps in central Gaza. A spring budget to be held in March as the government hints at tax cuts ahead of the next general election. And campaigners warn of a risk to health for the third of the UK's population experiencing mold in their homes. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. We begin tonight with allegations of sexual harassment, sleaze and bullying at the heart of the Red Arrows. The victims, all former members of the world-famous RAF squadron, have broken their public silence for the first time, telling Sky News about what they describe as the unit's toxic culture. They strongly criticize an internal investigation by the Royal Air Force, dismissing it as a travesty of justice. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes has this exclusive report.
Their motto is meant to be excellence.
Your camera's ready.
But an internal inquiry last month exposed widespread predatory behaviour on the Red Arrows. The Royal Air Force had hoped the investigation would draw a line under the scandal. But victims have broken cover in an exclusive Sky News documentary to slam the inquiry as a travesty of justice and to share allegations of harassment and bullying. Requesting anonymity, the women's words are voiced by actors.
It just feels like they're marking their own homework. They want us quiet and they think it will go away. And it's not going to happen because none of us are happy with how it's been dealt with.
The utter derogatory tone, the dismissive nature and the derisory writing.
It just shows how this whole system is flawed from the start until now.
Kate and Lucy, who've since left the RAF along with Rachel, were among those to give evidence to the non-statutory inquiry. But they were then left in limbo for almost 2 years until the findings were released.
It's very much a secondary wound. You can't move on, you can't gain closure. I almost think it's worse than the actual behaviour that we experienced.
And how does it make you feel?
Angry, disrespected.
The inquiry confirmed widespread unacceptable behaviours between 2017 and 2021, including sexual harassment, the exposure of genitals and predatory activity. A second investigation was also released into allegations of failings by the chain of command. 2 pilots were sacked and 9 other individuals sanctioned. But the RAF doesn't appear to have told the victims who was punished and for what.
I think it's appalling. We haven't had any justice. In any normal corporation, you find out the outcome of an investigation like this and what happened to the perpetrator. It's very odd that they will not tell us.
Philip Ingram is a former army officer who co-founded a small group called the Independent Defence Authority that's been supporting the women. He too is scathing about the inquiry.
It's not victim-centric. The victims aren't at the heart of it.
What do you mean by that, not being victim-centric?
Everything in there reinforces the stories that the victims have given. So you know they've been hurt. You know they're victims. So make sure that everything that you do is looking after them first and foremost and bringing the detail out second. I haven't even touched on the victims in here.
An RAF spokesperson said 2 comprehensive and thorough investigations have been completed relating to unacceptable behaviours within the Red Arrows. This was followed by an unreserved apology from the Chief of the Air Staff and the introduction of many changes within the unit based on the recommendations of the reports. The RAF recognised it's taken some time to publish the findings, but it was important to get this right. The victims say they have little faith in air chiefs to bring about promised change. but they hope by speaking out, they might inspire others in the military to do the same.
Things can't be covered up with bravado and banter. I hope these actions that we're doing signal the start of a new era.
We need to keep this momentum going, and it's not going to happen overnight, but I hope it will change for the better.
If we want to serve in the armed forces for our country, we should be able to do that without having to face these disgusting behaviours.
And Deborah joins me now. And Deborah, of course, the documentary's just gone out. I have to say, I found bits of it quite shocking. How damaging do you think this will be for the RAF?
Well, the RAF's own inquiry that was published a month ago was damaging enough in terms of confirming this widespread predatory behaviour, but large parts, as you can see here, were redacted. So the victims' testimonies that we've just shown give a sense of the kind of culture that was going on behind the scenes. And the RAF really believes that they've lifted up the rug, they've shone a light underneath this sort of rotten culture and tackled it. They say they've got training, there's new leadership, and they believe think they could move on now into a new era. But the victims aren't happy. They don't believe that the inquiry has been thorough enough. It hasn't been transparent. And there's a real concern that this kind of activity not only is going on now in other parts of defence, but will continue to go on in the future.
Deborah Haynes, thank you. Now, police declared a major incident on the A9 in the Scottish Highlands after drivers were stuck for hours in heavy traffic caused by thick snow. Storm Gerrit has brought snow, rain and wind gusts of 80 miles an hour, with tens of thousands of homes without power in Scotland. Sky's Shingi Mararike reports.
After a few days of festive fun, hazardous weather put an end to any remaining Christmas cheer, especially for those travelling home from the Scottish Highlands.
We've been here for 3 hours now, stuck in the snow, along with hundreds of other vehicles by the look of it, stretching back to Aviemore in that direction and southbound down to Pitlochry. As you can see, winds are very strong, lots of snow. We've seen one snowplow a long time ago, and that's about it really. Won't be getting back to London today.
Police declared a major incident on the A9, with snowfall bringing miles of vehicles to a standstill. Severe conditions that left thousands without power. Wild weather across much of the country caused significant disruption. At Bristol Airport, plane landings were a struggle, with flights postponed here and elsewhere. Gusts of up to 80 miles an hour brought down trees and power lines at Fort William, forcing travellers to stay put. While falling trees also came dangerously close to people's homes. In other places in Scotland, like Fife, roads were turned into rivers as a waterway burst its banks. Flooded stations and trees on the track saw widespread cancellations across train networks. The Severn Bridge in Gloucestershire was also forced to close, with drivers across the country set to face difficult conditions over the next few days.
There is a fair degree of surface water out there, so like I say, we're encouraging people to drive to the conditions, allow additional time to complete the journeys, take some essential kit with them, some water, some warm clothing, etc., a fully charged phone. And if they do come into any difficult situations, to phone the emergency services.
The Met Office has decided to name Storm Gerrit as a warning to those travelling home after the holidays. And with difficult conditions set to linger during the week, the advice from the RAC to people using major roads like this one is do not underestimate the dangers of wet surfaces, fallen debris and high winds. People are often warned against travel in conditions like this, but for some it will be unavoidable, making this a damp end to a usually cheerful time of year. Shingi Mararike, Sky News, Richmond in North Yorkshire.
Well, let's bring in our Scotland correspondent, Conor Gillis. Conor, tell us, what's the latest on the A9, the road, of course, where so many drivers were stuck for hours today?
Well, it's not unusual at this time of the year and the height of winter to get snow, wind and rain across Scotland. But what is unusual is the widespread nature and the sustained nature of the severe weather that this country experienced today. And what is also very unusual is the mile after mile of stranded cars in blizzard conditions on the A9, that main route from the Highlands of Scotland down to where I am in central Scotland and the main cities. There were so many drivers trapped in their cars for 6, 7, 8 hours without food and water. I can confirm, though, tonight that that main road, the A9, has now fully reopened. Police Scotland confirming that this evening. We're also getting an update from the power companies. They are telling us that around 16,000 properties in Scotland remain without power this evening, and they are saying that the weather was more severe than forecast, and clearly they have struggled to get engineers to the correct places to try and reconnect those homes. And they are also saying that they will provide hot food at various pop-up canteens in various locations in the north of Scotland from 9 a.m. tomorrow. You can get the full details of that on the Sky News website. Many communities across the east of Scotland sustained flooding. There were images today of people being rescued from their homes in boats by the fire brigade. And clearly there was significant disruption on the railways too, with many services cancelled because the lines were clearly impassable. One service, one train in particular, was wrecked, the front carriage of that, when a tree collapsed onto that. So Network Rail and ScotRail, the main train service here in Scotland, confirming that clearly they will not be able to reassess the damage until daylight tomorrow. So more disruption lies ahead.
Conor Gillis with the latest there. Conor, thank you. And as Conor was mentioning, you can, of course, get the latest on the impact that the weather is having on transport from our website. Now, Israel has expanded its airstrikes on built-up areas of central and southern Gaza as it widens its offensive. As Israeli troops showed journalists Hamas tunnels running to the border with Israel, the head of the IDF warned that the campaign in Gaza will last for months to come. Meanwhile, the humanitarian toll continues to grow. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says more than 22,000 people have now died, with tens of thousands injured. Sky's Nicole Johnston reports now from Jerusalem.
A lifetime of dreams lost in an instant. Nagam Abu Samra, a university student and a Gaza karate champion. On Christmas Eve, an Israeli airstrike in Al-Maghazi camp killed her younger sister. And Nagam, seriously injured, lost a leg.
She is bleeding and has trouble with her lungs. She also has fractures in her left and right hand. Her right leg is cut off. I plead to humanity to evacuate this sports champion from Gaza to any country where there are good medical services to bring Nagam back.
Tragedy and torment. Every Gazan family has a story to tell. Nagam was her father's pride. Her mother didn't live to see the war. She died of cancer 3 months ago. How much more can people take of this? Dozens killed today, including people sheltering in a hospital near Han Yunis.
We're about to walk into Gaza. You can see the wall that surrounds the Gaza Strip. And on this side, that is the Erez border crossing terminal.
We're with the Israeli Defense Forces. It's the only way media can enter. Israel has blocked all foreign press from reporting on the war from inside Gaza. On display, a Hamas tunnel to keep its fighters, weapons and Israeli hostages out of sight.
What's so extraordinary about this tunnel is simply the size of it and how sophisticated it is. You can see pipes are running all the way through it. That was apparently for air, electricity cables, and even a railway track ran for a couple of miles into the centre of Gaza City.
When it comes to tunnels, even the Israeli military was impressed.
No question. Hamas are fantastic at creating terror tunnels. They are brilliant builders. You're looking at an iron-girded tunnel, reinforced with electricity. You have cables for communication equipment.
Will Israel level Gaza to the ground if that's what it takes to destroy the tunnels?
The challenge is Hamas put so much of that terror infrastructure under so many homes and institutions. That's why we're seeing so much destruction. We're going to do what we have to do in order so that the Israeli people can go to bed at night.
Look at the devastation wrought on North Gaza, the scale of it. Palestinians say they have no words for what is happening to them. Forced from one end of the strip to the other, no home to go back to, nothing is left, and they are worn out by this long, brutal war. Nicole Johnston, Sky News, Northern Gaza.
The Chancellor has revealed that he will set out a spring budget in March, probably his last opportunity to make any tax cuts before the next general election. Jeremy Hunt's announcement follows hints from the Conservatives over Christmas that they plan to introduce a number of tax and spending pledges. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, has more.
Post-Christmas sales this year were down slightly on last year. And as New Year approaches, Tory MPs are hoping Jeremy Hunt will put more money in shoppers' pockets, with tax cuts in a pre-election budget, which he's announced will be on March the 6th. After an autumn statement in which he cut national insurance, but overall tax levels rose, Mr Hunt gave a pre-Christmas pledge that he hopes to cut taxes in the budget.
When we can, we want to bring down the tax burden so that people keep more of the money that they earn every month.
One option is scrapping inheritance tax in a pre-election giveaway. But some Tory MPs want other measures too.
I think all tax cuts are good, and I know inheritance tax is one that most people dislike when they hear of it, but I do believe it would be better personally if we could see further reductions with the national insurance or some reductions in the income tax.
Cutting inheritance tax would create a clear dividing line with Labour. But the opposition says it's more about keeping Tory MPs happy.
We've had 25 tax rises in this Parliament alone. I think people are feeling the squeeze. People are feeling the cost of living crisis, and our NHS is on its knees. So what the Prime Minister is briefing about at the moment has far more to do with internal Conservative politics than it does with what is right for the country.
Other possible budget measures include help for first-time buyers, such as government support for longer fixed-term mortgages to reduce the amount needed for a deposit.
Hello, how are you?
A budget just 10 weeks away in early March suggests that the Chancellor and his next-door neighbour Rishi Sunak are keeping open the option of an early election in May. Or they just want Labour to believe they're keeping open the option. Whenever the election comes, the Tories hope a budget giveaway will boost their chances. John Craig, Sky News.
A group of charities is warning that a third of the UK's population experiences mould in their homes, and it can cost lives. The warning comes 3 years after the toddler Awabi Shak died due to a respiratory condition linked to damp and mould in his home in Rochdale. Sky's Adele Robinson reports.
Then the mold was here. You could obviously see it around here. You could obviously see mold behind this dryer.
It's now an all too familiar part of UK housing. And they painted?
They already painted this side.
15-year-old Jamie has lived here in temporary accommodation with his brother and mum for over 18 months now.
And you could see the mold there, right? And it goes into that way. So it's really bad.
They say their accommodation provider painted over all of this 3 months ago, but it started to come back.
His entire bedroom was so overcome with mould.
Jamie's mum, Heather, can't afford to keep the heating on all the time, and the mould's affecting their health.
It's been so bad. Every year during the winter time, when you can't keep your windows open 24 hours a day, the kids and I always end up getting chest infections. We've been sick every year because we all three have asthma. And we can feel the effect all year round, but during the wintertime it gets particularly difficult.
New figures show almost a third of people in Britain are living in homes with mould or damp. Cities in the west are more likely to experience dangerous conditions. Cardiff, Plymouth and Manchester top the list. Bristol, Glasgow and Liverpool make the top 10. And all of this being made worse by the energy crisis. Heating our homes is more expensive, and so people are doing it less. And with the higher cost of living, add in poor quality and ageing housing, and that's your recipe for more cold, damp and therefore mouldy homes. This month marks 3 years since 2-year-old Awar Ishaq died from the effects of mould in his home, with calls now for more financial support to make homes energy efficient and a focus on bills.
We need to see action to keep our energy bills down, because you can have all of these things in place, but if you can't afford to keep your home warm, then you're going to suffer from a cold, damp conditions which could lead to mould. And that, as we go into the 1st of January, we're obviously, unfortunately, going to see energy bills go up from the 1st of January and not go in the other direction.
Second City Housing say they've made efforts to tackle the mould, but claim there's been a failure to report leaks, inadequate ventilation and poor maintenance. A statement said, "We remain dedicated to resolving this matter promptly and collaboratively with Ms Leonard to ensure her living conditions meet necessary standards." Meanwhile, Heather says her health and her children's are at risk, and all this doesn't feel like a home should. Adele Robinson, Sky News, Birmingham.
A 46-year-old man has died after a car collided with a group of people outside a property in Burngreave in Sheffield. A number of other people were injured in the incident on College Close. Police say the emergency services were called following reports of violence and disorder. And as the call was underway, a car drove into a group of people. A 23-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder, and another man was also arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. The former European Commission President Jacques Delors has died at the age of 98. He held the post from 1985 to 1994 and played a key role in the creation of the single market and the euro. He also regularly clashed with Margaret Thatcher over their different political visions for Europe. The NHS says the number of appointments rescheduled because of strikes in England this year has passed 1.2 million. The latest walkouts by junior doctors this month saw another 86,000 patients having their treatments put back to another date. Further strikes from January 3rd are expected to bring more disruption. The National Trust says rising average temperatures, changing seasons and increasingly unpredictable weather are causing chaos for UK nature. The charity's annual report paints a bleak picture for the nation's wildlife, trees and plants, as Sabah Chowdhury now reports.
This year may have not only been the hottest on record, but the warmest in the past 120,000 years. Global rising temperatures have created harsher weather conditions and are rupturing our landscapes and animal habitats.
We've got two issues going on here. One is the locked-in climate change, which is seeing this continuing trend of hotter weather on average, both at the UK as well as globally, and also an increase in these extreme weather events.
This unpredictable weather is causing chaos for our surroundings. And it's our animals paying the price. Deers, for example, are being born later than normal, meaning they don't have body fat to survive winter, making them more vulnerable to disease and death. This autumn was wetter and warmer than usual, with Storm Babette in Kieran flooding parts of the UK, affecting our nature and wildlife.
So what we have here is a semi-natural flood defence.
But according to experts, nature itself can provide a solution to the impact of climate change.
I think with climate change, it's not so much a solution, it's more about managing our responses to how climate change is affecting us. And so that means that we have to be investing in a wide variety of measures, very local measures like we've been seeing about how to protect local areas from flooding or improve their drought tolerance, but also in broader terms, our agricultural systems. We need to be investing in those to make those more drought tolerant and more flood resilient.
Promising, but we shouldn't be lulled into a false sense of security. As the world gets hotter, the weather becomes more extreme. And so, experts warn, adapting to this new norm may be our only option.
Sabah Chowdhury, Sky News.
Okay, let's get the latest sport now with Jasper.
Hi there. Champions Manchester City are back into the Premier League's top four. They came from a goal down to beat Everton 3-1. Jack Harrison put the home side in front in the first half. City equalised early in the second half with a great goal from Phil Foden. The Premier League champions went in front after a handball by Amadou Onana in the area, and Julian Alvarez put away the penalty. A mistake by Everton goalkeeper Jordan Pickford gifted City a third goal. Bernardo Silva, the scorer. City are 5 points behind leaders Liverpool with a game in hand. It's 3 home wins in a row for Chelsea. They beat Crystal Palace 2-1. Mykhailo Mudryk put Chelsea in front after 13 minutes. Palace equalised just before the break with a goal from Michael Olise. The winner came late after Eberiche Eze fouled Noni Madueke in the box. Penalty given following a VAR check. Madueke stepped up to win it. Chelsea go 10th. It's 4 straight defeats for Brentford. They lost 4-1 at home to Wolves. A header from Mario Lemina put the visitors in front after 13 minutes. Moments later, it was 2-0. Hee-Chan Hwang capitalised on a mistake in the Brentford defence. Johan Wieser pulled a goal back for Brentford after 16 minutes. Wolves went 3-1 up inside the opening half hour. Hwang with his second of the game. Substitute Jean Rigner Bellegarde then sealed the win late in the second half. Wolves are up to 11th. In the Scottish Premiership, Hearts got the better of Hibernian in the Edinburgh derby. Hearts won it in dramatic fashion with a goal from striker Lawrence Shankland in the 3rd minute of stoppage time. Earlier, Shankland and Hibs' Martin Boyle missed first-half penalties. Hearts stay 3rd in the table. Kilmarnock are 2 points behind them after a 1-0 win at St Mirren. Marley Watkins scored the only goal. Livingston and St Johnstone finished goalless. The games between Rangers and Ross County and Aberdeen and Motherwell were both postponed due to Storm Gerrit. 16-year-old Luke Littler goes from strength to strength at the World Darts Championship. He's become the youngest player to reach the last 16 of the competition. The teenager beat Canada's Mike Campbell 4-1 at Alexandra Palace. He will face either Jim Williams or former world champ Raymond van Barneveld in the next round. A century by Dean Elgar has helped put South Africa in charge of the first test against India. He finished day 2 unbeaten on 140 at Centurion Park. South Africa closing on 256 for 5, 11 runs ahead with 5 wickets in hand. There is plenty more reaction to tonight's football over on Sky Sports News. We'll be back later on.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the political commentator Benedict Spence and the Observer's chief leader writer Sonia Soda. We'll be right back. Great to have you. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, let's take a look at our top stories. Women who were in the Red Arrows have described a toxic culture and criticized an internal RAF investigation, claiming it was a travesty of justice. Police declared a major incident on the A9 in the Scottish Highlands after drivers were stuck in blizzard conditions brought by Storm Gerrit. And inside what Israel claims is the largest Hamas tunnel, as thousands flee the expanding IDF ground offensive in central Gaza. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the political commentator Benedict Spence and the Observer's chief leader writer Sonia Soda. Welcome both. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. Well, the Times reports that Labour will promise a big expansion of childcare, including plans to create thousands of new nursery places. The Mirror looks ahead to the budget on March the 6th. Their assessment, Rishi helps the rich get richer. The Guardian leads with an admission from a senior Metropolitan Police officer that victims of domestic abuse have lost trust in the force. According to the Financial Times, the world's biggest defense companies have seen an increase of more than 10% in the orders being made to them in the last 2 years, with the war in Ukraine cited as the main reason. The Eye reports that hundreds of homes, which their owners were forced to sell to make way for an high-speed rail line between Birmingham and Manchester that was never completed, are now being rented out and making their landlords an estimated profit of £9 million a year. The front page of the Daily Mail is about the plan for inheritance tax cuts, reporting that the Chancellor will use them to underline the political divide with Labour. The Star leads on the travel chaos caused by Storm Gerrit. And the reminder that by scanning the QR code that you see on your screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight, as I mentioned, by Benedict Spence and Sonia Soda. So welcome both. Let's start with this news of the budget. We now have a date, spring budget, March 6th. Let's take a quick look at the FT. A lot of papers have it obviously on their front pages. Here it's a budget set for March 6th. Everyone's saying that, well, some people implying that this could be a sign that perhaps we're going to get a spring election. Benedict, do you think we're going to get a spring election?
I'm not sure we are going to get a spring election, because I think that what you're going to see is that the budget is going to be framed in a very sort of big, this is a couple of months away still, and here it comes, it's coming down the line, almost like some sort of big film release, building up the anticipation, because so much of what has gone before has been just a damp squib from the Conservatives for so long. They have failed to sort of grasp the imagination of the public. They've got one last chance. I'm not even really sure if it is a last chance, to be honest, but one last chance to kind of get a message across. But then they're inevitably going to need a bit of time to sort of let people know that it's working, because I think the one thing that we would probably all agree on is that actually most members of the public, whatever they hear from the government, they just go, yeah, well, you've been saying that for however long, you've been in power for 13 years, it's not going to happen. So I'm not convinced it's going to be early. It could be. I mean, there might be something that they spring on us and they go, but you can only have it if you vote for it now. But, we wait and see. I suspect it'll probably be later in the year.
Sonia?
I agree with that. I think what they're doing, I mean, there was always going to be a budget in spring anyway. And, the Conservatives have been trailing these tax cuts, which we're going to go on to talk about what some of them might potentially be. But I think by having the budget in early March, the government is leaving themselves time to go for, an April potentially, or more likely a May election, and to have some of those announcements land. I think it's very unlikely, though, so I think they're leaving them space to do that just in case there's a change in the political mood and their position in the polls change. But I think it's very unlikely. I think it's psychologically very difficult to go for an early election when you are as far behind in the polls as the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, phasing at currently is. So I would be very surprised. But I think they're just giving themselves maximum leeway for just in case they have this budget and it starts to change things and then, they decide to go for a spring election. It leaves that option open. But like Benedict, I don't think it's going to happen.
And let's look at some of the things that might be planned. So front page of the Daily Mail, because it's all about inheritance tax, basically. Front page of the Mail, Hunt plan to slash death tax by half. And then if we look at the Mirror, different take. Rishi helps the rich get richer. There it is, the Mirror. So, a lot of talk around inheritance tax, a lot of talk around helping first-time buyers. So I guess perhaps the government trying to appeal to all sorts of different groups of voters.
Yeah, so will they, won't they? There's been this big debate about inheritance tax, and certain Conservatives are very keen for inheritance tax to be scrapped, and which is why I think you're seeing some people brief it into the papers. What that Mirror headline is referring to is when you look at the substance of it, inheritance tax is only paid by 3.7% of estates on death. So it's a tax that very few people end up paying. A tax cut, so if you were to scrap it altogether, which is certainly being talked about, analysis by the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, suggests that half of this tax cut would go to estates worth £2.1 million or more, and the average tax cut would be 1.1 million. 90% of estates, they're just, that people are never going to see the benefit, yet abolishing it would leave a huge hole in the budget of 7 billion going up to 10 billion in a few years' time. What the Conservatives will be gambling on is that it's a very unpopular tax, even though so few people end up paying it, because people are worried they might end up paying it. They see it as a tax on aspiration, on passing things on to your kids. So that is what the gamble is. But I think it is fundamentally, wealth is under-taxed in this country already compared to income. It is fundamentally the wrong thing to do.
I mean, this is the thing. Up until now, not many people have paid it. But, and the Tories know this very well because this is their voter base, a quarter of pensioners now live in households that will become eligible to pay this in a very short space of time. And I think that does sort of focus the mind rather a lot on people who perhaps aren't necessarily just voting, thinking about this current election, but future elections to come. Because it's correct to point out that actually, wealth hasn't been taxed properly in this country. There's a dreadful sort of concentration of it at the top end of society, and that has benefited pensioners in particular very well by also not building enough houses. But now a lot of pensioners might well be starting to look to their grandchildren or children, for example, and saying, well, what can I potentially do to help those people get on the ladder? And it might actually then counterintuitively prove very popular to say, well, actually, we want to give as much as we can to people lower down on the rungs. There is also just that fact that a lot of people do just feel fundamentally that it's not very fair that you're taxed throughout your life, and then on top of that, the government might come along and take another chunk right at the end. So even people who don't pay it, I think, fundamentally feel that it doesn't sit right with them.
I suppose the fundamental question is whether you think Rishi Sunak can do anything to turn the fortunes of the Conservatives around.
I mean, I think that's a very good question. And for me, you should never write anything off in politics, but it is very, very difficult to see how the Prime Minister can turn this around, because fundamentally the next election, I think, is going to be fought on the state of the economy and what people have experienced over the last 13 years in terms of cost of living crisis, what's happened to their household budgets. You can't turn that around in a year. Inflation might fall. Well, that very high inflation that we saw a year ago, inflation of 10%, that's baked in. People are paying more for things and their wages are not going as far, and we've not seen real wage growth.
But we have to say it might simply be a sort of a sabotage election, if you like. If things are that bad for the Conservatives, they think, well, how can we make things as difficult for the Labour Party as possible? And I think the Labour Party understands that. You see that in the very cautious way, actually, that they're not promising people the earth. They recognise the country is in a very bad state. But let's take inheritance tax, for example. As I've just said, a quarter of pensioner households at some point soon will be eligible to be paying that. Well, that's rather a lot of income, potentially, for a Labour government that it might actually be looking forward to in the next 5 to 10 years that the Conservatives could potentially get rid of. So right there, they're creating, this isn't necessarily done with the best intentions of the country, but they're creating a very difficult situation where they're saying to the Labour Party, well, you're not going to be able to have that income, and if you try to reverse that policy, well, that's going to make you very unpopular for the next 5 years. Which
takes us to the front page of The Times, which actually mentions Labour, and it says Labour will promise big expansion on childcare, so they're offering nursery places. So, Sonia, first of all, I guess Labour has to prepare for a snap election. I mean, they're not going to know, but they have to be ready. And what do we know about this specific promise?
Well, you know, they've been making very positive noises about childcare over the last year. Over the last year. So we know it's an area they're interested in. It's an area that working parents are very interested in because in the UK, we've got some of the most expensive childcare in Europe. Some really shocking figures, actually, in this Times report, which is that Labour have done some analysis that shows that in some areas of the country, like in Sunderland, for example, there are only 12 childcare places for every 100 children under the age of 5. We all know, I'm sure, stories of how expensive it is to get childcare, parents who literally cannot afford it, parents who cannot find places. And we've got an issue with employment in this country as well, where too many people are out of work. And the fact of the matter is, investing in early years childcare, it's good for children because they do better, particularly children from disadvantaged backgrounds, if they've had that education in the early years. It's better for families because it helps them do better economically. And also it's better for the economy because we've got too many parents who are out of work because they can't find childcare. So it's a bit of a no-brainer policy from Labour. The question will be, how are you going to get these extra childcare places and how much funding will they require up front? There's something in the Times report suggesting that they will be attached to primary schools, which will be very popular with parents, but that will obviously require some sort of start-up funding.
But I guess Labour is going to need policies, obviously, for the year ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, we've seen them come up with they're in a tricky spot because they can't, as Benedict was just saying, they can't promise the earth. They've got some really tight spending rules that they say they're going to stick to. But they have produced a fair few policies already. For example, in early years, they're going to be investing money into breakfast clubs, for example. So all children get access to free breakfast clubs. Quite a cheap policy, but a very effective policy, if you look at the education evidence. So I think we can be expecting to see more of these, but the tricky thing for them is, public services are in a state now where they require investment. They say they will raise the money for that through economic growth. I think the question is, what if you can't get economic growth without investing up front in things like the NHS and childcare?
OK. And Benedict, do you think a lot of this is actually cutting through with the electorate?
I think it will to a demographic that is already going to probably vote Labour at the next general election. I think that this is simply rewarding them. But it's also a morally good thing to do because actually I'd say broader than everything, it's a civilizational issue. Actually, when you talk to young people, they talk about not being able to get on the housing ladder, not being able to afford childcare, and that is preventing them from having children. That causes a demographic bomb at some point, as several other countries, developed countries, are seeing. So this is long-term care. We need to look at it in those terms. Making sure that people are able to have children in the first place is vitally important. And I do feel, ironically, the Conservatives, all supposed to be about nuclear families and what have you, they've completely left that by the wayside. Their record on housing, on childcare. This is something where Labour could do a lot of good, especially seeing as it anticipates it probably will win the next election. It can afford to be quite unpopular on things like housing policies, but this is something that I think you're right, will be quite popular, whatever way you spin it.
Benedict and Sonia, thank you for now. Stay with us, of course. It's reported that the Home Secretary will not face disciplinary action from the Prime Minister over his joke about drink spiking. We'll discuss that next.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry. Legal abortion!
It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her.
Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
They're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world.
Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, Benedict Spence and Sonia Soda. Okay, let's go to the Mirror, page 6. This story that broke a couple days ago, and it's about the Home Secretary, and the Prime Minister is not going to act over James Cleverly's spiking joke. Now, this is a slightly off-color joke that he made about spiking his own wife's drink. What do you make of the fact, Sonia, A, of the joke itself, and B, the fact that the Prime Minister isn't going to do anything about it?
Well, it doesn't surprise me that the Prime Minister is standing by the Home Secretary because, I mean, he's lost quite a few Home Secretaries of late. But I do think that this joke was in appalling taste. I'm not somebody who gets easily offended, you know, if someone's making a joke, and you know, jokes are made in political circles. You know, we've all been to dinners, we've heard them, but I think this joke was particularly inappropriate because I mean, it's about a crime and a particularly terrible crime. You know, spiking a drink with Rohypnol. The Home Secretary was joking about it, kind of in relation to his wife, and I just think it sends a terrible signal. Spiking is a really serious crime. We've got a massive issue with male violence against women and girls.
And they just made an announcement about it as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, tone matters. And tone matters in terms of young men in this country and boys and thinking about their attitudes to women and girls. So I personally think that this does really matter. I think it was an appalling taste. And I think it's right for politicians through other parties to be calling it out.
Benedict, he did apologise, though, almost straight away. So what do you think?
I think, I mean, obviously the apology is very important, that he didn't waste any time, no prevarication, anything like that. I think the fact that the Prime Minister hasn't necessarily seen fit to do anything about it, it might be because behind closed doors, privately, James Cleverly has been very apologetic. It may be because they don't want to draw too much attention to it. It all may also, though, be, you know, we hear stories, don't we, all the time about how Rishi Sunak is on thin ice. Well, if you sort of look around and think, well, who might be a good challenger to Rishi Sunak, there aren't that many, but I suspect James Cleverly would probably be one. So actually having somebody like that being, you know, potentially very gaffe-prone, as on your in your corner, so to speak, because you haven't reprimanded him for making a joke, might be more sensible than, going in two-footed, so to speak.
But beyond that, as Sonia mentioned, can't really have another Home Secretary again, can we?
I think we just sort of assume now that when you're in the Home Office, bad things are going to happen to you. It's cursed, and that's just the way that it is. I mean, we're waiting. The last person to come out of it successfully was Theresa May, and then she suffered throughout her premiership. So I think you just need to look at it as being a very cursed thing. But a year, maybe to the next general election, potentially less. I mean, who knows? We could have a new Home Secretary. Why not? Any names that you want to throw up? I mean, who fancies some pain for the next 6 months? Let's see.
I'll tell you what. Let's leave that hanging and go to the Financial Times front page there. Global defence order books bulge as Ukraine puts budgets on war footing. So basically, a lot of defence firms are seeing a spike in their orders because of the war in Ukraine.
Yes, 10% higher. I think that's what the FT says. And what this piece says, it points out, is that very often you will see things, as it were, backlogged after a war has broken out. Is that actually it's only then that you start to see people ramping up their spending. It is concerning, though, obviously, when you have a $760 billion extra dollars worth of equipment sort of being ordered. But let's be very clear, we were put on notice some years ago, actually. NATO countries in particular were put on notice that they needed to be pulling their weight far more when it comes to defence. Russia was very clear, actually, about what it wanted to do. China has been very clear, actually, what its long-term intentions are. And you notice, actually, who it is that's putting in the orders. It's countries like Poland, it's the Eastern European countries. It's countries that stand potentially to lose the most if conflicts continue to break out, as they're likely to do. War doesn't just go away because we all fancy that it will. And when you've got major powers actively saying what it is that they plan on doing, or even smaller powers like Venezuela saying, we will invade Guyana at some point, you do have to take it seriously. So it makes a lot of sense that countries are starting to put these orders in.
Sonia?
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. It feels like times have really changed and, one in terms of global conflict, and one place that we're seeing that is in these sorts of budgets. So, yeah.
Yeah. Let's take a look now at the Star, front page of the Star, and Storm Gerrit, which is causing travel chaos. I don't know whether that's the A9, but certainly the A9 in Scotland had people stuck there for hours and hours, and it's almost a Christmas tradition, isn't it?
Well, I think it's just the worst timing possible, really. So just as people are on the move after Christmas, spending Christmas with their families, trying to get around the country, the storm has sort of put a stop to that. I've got a friend who's sort of stuck up in Cumbria because there weren't any trains running south today. There's the motorways. Apparently, Bristol Airport, one plane had to attempt a landing 3 times because it was so windy. It was quite interesting, actually. Some of the news reports say that the Met Office deliberately named this storm because one of the reasons that they named the storm is because of the impact it will have on the country, not just, its weather measurements. And they wanted to be clear with people, this is quite a serious storm that's going to have a big impact on travel plans, particularly during a holiday period. So that's why they decided to name it. But it's pretty appalling timing, I think, for people who are trying to move around the country after Christmas.
Yeah. Sonia, Benedict, thanks for that. And we'll, of course, see you in the next hour. Let's take a look at the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, severe gales and heavy rain from Storm Gerrit will be mostly gone by tomorrow, but it'll stay very windy with widespread blustery showers and prolonged rain returning on Saturday. There'll be a windy start tomorrow with persistent rain and snow for Shetland and a scattering of showers elsewhere concentrated in the west. The morning will bring sunny spells and locally heavy showers to most parts, wintry over northern hills, but Shetland will keep the more persistent rain and snow for a time. It will be mild in the south, cold in the north, and windy everywhere. There'll be gales over many southern and western coasts and hills, but the severe gales in the far north will ease. The afternoon will bring little change, with sunny spells and a scattering of blustery showers continuing into the evening.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up next on Sky News at 11. Victims of predatory behavior in the Red Arrows claim an investigation into the scandal was a travesty of justice. We're going to have an exclusive report.